do a little internal countdown for that. You're gonna give me the like point at me. Yeah, there we go. Great. All right, thanks. Well, thanks everyone for being here. I'm Amy Antonucci. I am a board member with New Hampshire Peace Action, and I'm happy to welcome you to our every other week Peace and Justice Conversation series online. I want to let you know, if you're new to New Hampshire Peace Action, that we are a group dedicated to making a contribution to creating a world in which nuclear disarmament, mutual security, global understanding, international cooperation, and respect for human rights create social, economic, and environmental benefits for all. This every other week's online conversation series has been a way for us to engage and sort out how to make these really deep changes that we've all been yearning for. And tonight we're going to delve into how to keep at the hard work, honoring how we feel, and nourishing ourselves so that we can really stay the course and do what we know needs to be done. Tonight, we have Kendra Ford from the Exeter Unitarian Universalist Congregation here to share the work that reconnects based on Joanna Macy's writing and work and many other people by now. I have known Kendra for quite a few years and been very helped and inspired by this work and her sharing it with us. I'm going to pass it over to her. Again, as Will said, the first part of this will be on the live stream. And then we're going to go to some breakout groups and personal kind of conversations that Kendra will tell us about. And at that point, we'll be stopping the live stream so we can do that together. And Kendra, go ahead. Let's welcome Kendra.
Thank you, Amy. It's lovely to get to work with you again and to get to work with New Hampshire Peace Action. How many of you are familiar with Joanna Macy's work or the work that reconnects, The Great Turning? Is this getting some thumbs up and some hands? Wonderful. So this will be just a short version of this, and you may have gotten to do some longer, deeper practices other places. But this is the kind of work that is just so flexible that it's just always a great way to reconnect with ourselves, with what we're trying to do, and with each other. And the one other thing I should say about myself by way of introductions is that because it's a pandemic, I am coming to you live from my home office, which means that my 7-year-old and my husband, who are having dinner right now, may start to move around, and you may hear them in the background, because 7 is an age that is just enthusiastic about everything. So you may hear some enthusiasm. So I'll introduce what the work that reconnects is, and some of you know this, and some of you this will be fresh. And I feel like every time I hear this, it helps me rethink about it. So the work that reconnects is a set of practices that Joanna Macy developed herself, but I think very importantly, with other people. She is such a collaborator. All of her books are written with co-authors. All of her workshops are co-led. She's always finding a new person to collaborate with. Sometimes it's an expert on Rilke poetry, and sometimes it's a singer-songwriter, and sometimes it's another eco-activist. She's just always working together. She never works alone. So she lives out that reconnection, just making sure that relationship is part of the work every step of the way. So that's one of the ways that she just lives that reconnection. But the reconnection is to the earth. We live in a culture that's pretty distant from the earth, really. And we can lose the sense of the cycles of life, and we can miss how things are affected. So it's allowing us to deepen that relationship and to acknowledge the harm that is there, and that our fear of that harm can get in the way of our relationship with the earth. It's so hard to look at the harm that you can just not look at the connection in order to skip the difficulties. So that's part of reconnecting, is acknowledging harm done, and then moving through that to reaffirm the relationship. And it's very much about reconnecting with ourselves as well. You know, these days we do so much just like this on these little boxes, virtually, and it's kind of a disembodied experience. And if you spend a lot of time in the virtual world, you can kind of lose your sense of yourself as a person with a body and with that very physical experience. And so that's one of these days I really think about that reconnection, how easy it is to feel kind of distant from ourselves in this pandemic life. But before the pandemic life and after and during, we can get busy and distracted, and we live in a culture that doesn't encourage us to be still and settle into our own spiritual sense and our own sense of ourselves and how we actually navigate life. So that's the other kind of reconnection that this work works on, is get you back to how you actually live, how you actually experience life. So this work of reconnecting is part of how Joanna Macy articulates getting ourselves into the work of the Great Turning, which is moving from an industrial growth society, or a society that's based in violent extraction. And this is a conversation that's really been up the past year. So some of these things that we sometimes had to really work to get sort of get footing on and get people some context for, I think many more people are just ready to say, oh yeah, we live in a late stage capitalist society that runs on using people up. So all of those, and the racism and patriarchy and all of those things, that's the society that we're trying to turn from. So the Great Turning is turning away from that and turning toward a life-sustaining society. People who can live with the earth, people who understand that we are the earth. Ways of being that are nourishing for all life, human and beyond human. So that's the Great Turning. We're clearer about what we're turning away from than what we're turning toward, because what we're turning toward is still in creation. It's still in the process of becoming. So it can be hard to get our minds to go there, because it's still coming into being. And Joanna Macy says, so how amazing is it to get to be alive in the moment when we're doing that, when we're turning toward this thing that's being created, this life that we get to have a hand in its formation. So that's what we're about, is getting our energy and our capacity and our connections to do that work of creativity and what's next. So in this time of change, there are three stories being told. there is the story of business as usual. I mean, the name sort of explains what it is. It's Wall Street. It's profits are so important that everything else has to take a back seat. Everything else has to stay the same so that we can keep making profits. So for a lot of his life, Donald Trump has lived in business as usual. You keep making real estate deals and you keep just doing the same things. You keep flying around like everything's fine. But now what we're seeing, I think more than business as usual, is the story of the great unraveling. I see someone is knitting. So you may have, whoever that is, may have a particularly visceral sense of what the great unraveling might feel like. Just pull on that thread and it just all comes apart. There it is. And I think we're really aware of the great unraveling right now. And that's when the systems are obviously failing. When the way we used to do things, the way we've always done things, just come apart. And you can start to see that they were built on foundations that were never sustainable. And you can see that the harm that was done. And you can see that the racism and the sexism and exploiting indigenous peoples, you can see how that just means the whole story wasn't true ever. And it's so hard to comprehend how big that is. And so when the great unraveling is happening, it's really easy to get overwhelmed and to just go numb because it's so much. I mean, the whole story of our society and all of the structures of our society are all coming unraveled. And it's kind of shocking. So that's why it's really important to remember this third story, which is the story of the Great Turning and of the fact that in the midst of this unraveling, in the midst of the collapse, there's this creation. There's the new life coming into being. And you all are participating in that a lot. There are probably days when you don't feel like you're making any headway, but even holding on to the idea that there's another way to do this, even holding on to the possibility that we could live with each other differently than we have for all these hundreds of years, that helps with that turning to a new society, to a new world. And then any concrete actions that you can make that to follow with that idea just all help. And we don't know how they're going to turn out, but they're all helping push that turning. Joanna Macy has been writing recently that, we'd kind of hoped that if we worked really hard, we could kind of fix the system that we have, that we could reform the system that exists and get it to go better, and that it doesn't look like that anymore. Now it looks like collapse is needed, that the only way to get to the new form is to let the old form fall apart pretty completely. And I notice I get a little out of breath saying that. So it's hard to be living through that. I mean, it's hard to live through it. It's hard to be so aware that you're living through it. And we are. So our work is to keep our strength and our resilience and our connections and our love so that we can just keep pushing for the turning toward the better version of life on this planet. So that said, what I would really like to do is to invite you into a series of practices, because the work that reconnects is not about talking. It's about practicing. It's about getting into our bodies and building our relationships. And so that's what we'll spend the rest of our time together doing. I am going to give you one more piece of information, which is that Joanne Macy describes this work as happening in a spiral. So there are 4 kinds of practices, and they just feed each other, and you just go round and round and round, and you can do it in 5 minutes. You can spend 2 weeks at it. We're going to spend about 45 minutes at it. You always start with gratitude. Every spiritual tradition in the world that we know about starts with gratitude. It's just a good foundation for life. And it's a place you can always return to, no matter the circumstances. So having grounded ourselves in gratitude, we're going to move into honoring our pain, because it's essential that we make space for the pain, for the grief, for the anger, for the alienation, for all of it. And then, having made space for that, for ourselves and for each other, then we move around the spiral to seeing with new eyes, getting a new perspective on ourselves, on the world, on how we might do things, or maybe just feel refreshed because when you take time to grieve, you can see again. And then with that new perspective, we decide how to go forth, how to meet the world again, how to take action, how to be present. And that often brings us right back to gratitude. So you can just keep going around and around, from gratitude to honoring our pain, to seeing with new eyes, to going forth. So we'll start with gratitude. So we'll introduce ourselves with gratitude, but we're going to do it in some smaller groups. Will put us into groups of about 6 people.